every time I go anywhere in Latin America, people ask me, how can I get a visa to go work where you live because I know the wages are better? This has
Mhm.
nothing to do with socialism. This has to do with colonialism, imperialism, the exploitation, and the exploitative system that we live under capitalism. And this is just across the board.
Welcome to the Colony Archive. Today I'm joined with Camila Escalante. She's a news editor for the Casacion News and also a correspondent for Press TV covering Latin America. Camila, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I was following some of your work and you're covering what is happening in Venezuela right now. So the U.S. is ramping up the imperialist threats. So can you tell us what is happening?
Right. Well, every day seems to be a further escalation. It's no longer a threat, it's a real escalation. A threat would be if in Washington or in the United States we were hearing lawmakers and officials saying things about how President Maduro needed to be removed, about how they should be thinking about issuing orders to invade Venezuela. If they were threatening, they could sit around and taunt Venezuela through the US media and other means and try to pass pieces of legislation to try to proceed with some sort of ground invasion or whatever it is. But they're actually already doing some of these things. It's a real military buildup of, uh, of massive in size that's taking place in occupied Puerto Rico, taking place in what's now practically occupied Trinidad and Tobago with its US aligned prime minister. And they have a lot of military assets in places like Guyana, which is very friendly to the United States. It was friendly with the US under the Biden administration and under the Trump administration, just the same. And they're also doing drills and moving military assets in places like Panama, Dominican Republic. So this is like, it's just continuing every day. It seems like every couple of days. And especially if you're online and reading some of uh, these news pages, these X accounts, they they purport to have information that no one else seems to have access to. I don't know where they claim to get this from. That, that there's a further escalation, that there's just hours remaining for President Maduro, something we've been hearing for the last 8 years. They say that his days are numbered. I mean, his days have numbered thousands of days since they started saying that his days are numbered. And so it just continues. And I know that it's just all part of this, psychological war on the people of Venezuela, the government, and really the armed forces to try to get them to become nervous, to turn on the government, to try to question the situation. But it hasn't worked, and it's actually not going to work because Venezuela has been under threat for so long. If they wanted to do some of this stuff, maybe they missed their opportunity. And so it seems like the US is going to go ahead and they will be doing something. What Venezuela has said is that they have tried to plant some sorts of false flags, both from Trinidad on Venezuelan soil. They want to make it seem as if Venezuela is attacking the United States, a US warship or plane or whatever it is, or they want to actually provoke an attack so that they have the excuse to go in there and attack Venezuela in some way. But at the same time, of course, you know that the Trump administration or the president has authorized CIA covert operations in Venezuela, something that the Venezuelans believe has been going on all along, anyways, since at least Chavez came to power, but probably a lot earlier than that. So they have a lot of different things that they're trying to do to try to position themselves and really just to try to intimidate, harass, and bully this country into submission. But it really doesn't seem like it's working. So, they can't really say, because they've come so far, the United States can't say that Venezuela possesses weapons of mass destruction. They can't say it has biological weapons. They can't say they have chemical weapons. They can't say they're building a nuclear weapon. I mean, we're kind of like 25 years into this and they haven't said any of that. So they have to say all the other things. They have to designate these cartels as terrorist organizations, foreign terrorist organizations, and then they have to connect that to the government of President Nicolas Maduro, who they said actually heads these cartels, the so-called but really non-existent Cartel de los Soles and the Tren de Aragua. And what Venezuelans say is just the same. They could designate the United States government as a terrorist organization because the actual cartels and organized crime that takes place in all of Latin America. Anytime armed forces or police come and arrest those people or interdict them or whatever, they find out that the weapons they're carrying are manufactured in the United States. They're US weapons. So it's US weapons that are used to do all of the crime on our continent. They're actually killing our people in Latin America with their weapons that they're exporting. They're also buying mercenaries to go commit crimes in countries across the world. And some of these people of Latin American background, where do they go to get training? They go to either the sort of occupied US countries or friendly US countries or to southern Florida to get that training. And so the countries of Latin America, peoples of Latin America have a really strong case against the US for so many decades of meddling and so many coups, even things that people don't even necessarily know. Like we know about the big invasions and bombings in Panama and Grenada. We know about I guess, more recently, the coup that took place in Bolivia surrounding the 2019 elections, which ousted Evo Morales. But in so many other instances, there were progressive governments, not necessarily socialist governments. It wasn't always like an Allende situation, but the US worked to ensure that they couldn't remain in power or imposed their own governor for that country. And they're trying to do that right now. And they've been actually successful in some cases, in the case of Daniel Noboa in Ecuador, in the case of Javier Milei in Argentina, same in essentially Haiti, Dominican Republic, Panama, Costa Rica, even Guatemala, which supposedly has a progressive government. But if you see what he's actually doing, he's leading a lot of this of the calls around new fair elections in Venezuela and things like that. So the right wing in Venezuela is having or not in Venezuela, in Latin America, the right wing is having a resurgence. It's really emboldened, and there's some really key things happening around the region right now. And even within the last few years, I've had a number of interviews or was asked to speak on panels, and a lot of people were asking me about a so-called pink tide 2.0. And even when they were asking me, I was thinking, what a bizarre thing to ask. We were never at the point that they were asking me about that. And I remember a lot of the other talking heads, a lot of the other analysts, which I'm not an analyst myself, but some of the people that you see in a lot of the same programs as myself who speak about the same things, they were praising this sort of pink tide that they saw happening, but it had already left. It was already gone. What we're seeing right now, the rise of the far right in Latin America, and being emboldened and really forming these strong or strengthening alliances with the far right in Europe and with the Trump administration is something that has been coming for a long time. And they are preparing to take power in other countries as well, if not through the ballot box, which usually is not how they do it, through making it impossible for actual leftist or socialist leaders to participate in elections. And by doing things like framing leftist leaders as narco terrorists or part of some sort of organized crime. That's what they're trying to do with President Petro right now. So what's happening in Venezuela extends to the rest of the region. They're attacking Venezuela for the important key leadership role that it plays on this continent and across the global south. It was the government and President Nicolas Maduro in particular was very outspoken and very fast to state his position on the special military operation of Russia in Ukraine, about Palestine always, and about Syria and so many other issues. And so there's a lot of reasons why Marco Rubio and his administration are deciding to do this now, and why it's so important to topple the Venezuelan government. Of course, it's for oil. Of course, it's for natural resources. Of course, it's because of geopolitical positioning. But it's also because they don't like that. Not only do they have their own sovereign project and their own independent, which is being led by President Nicolas Maduro. He really is the ringleader of Latin American socialism at this point, which is not to, not to forget about the Sandinistas and the Cubans, but they have the Venezuelan government. And Chavismo has been instrumental in recent years in bringing people together around the causes of anti-fascism, around the causes of women's issues, around all sorts of different things. And people have been convening in Caracas and holding all of these different meetings and building and getting to know each other in person, not just meeting on Zoom, and forming those strategic, important alliances with different governments, but also peoples in the rest of the global south as well.
I like what you said about the fact that they can't, about Venezuela, they don't talk about weapons of mass destruction. And at this point, I think they're actually trying to cater to a particular Hollywood fantastical image of the world. So when they talk about the Middle East, it's, terrorism, jihadists and weapons of mass destruction in order to justify invasion and intervention. But with Venezuela, I think the American public, they think would be more receptive to, drug trafficking and the boogeyman of drugs. So they're using the drug card with Venezuela. And I also like what you said about the policies of the Venezuelan government. I mean, oftentimes in the Western media, we just hear about, Chavez or Maduro as if, it's just a one-man show and there's just like one person, popular government in a sense. And you could say that Chavez, Maduro, they have a popular mandate to pursue the policies that they do. But regarding that, because I have not been to Venezuela, but you travel there often. So when you talk to the people on the streets, average Venezuelans, and I guess you could tell us what the different demographics are. What do they say about the current government there?
Well, there's people who support the government and there's people who don't. And right now, people who don't support the government are saying that it's absolutely absurd that those far right Venezuelans, that extremist sector of the opposition, are calling for an armed invasion or a foreign invasion of their country, that they would invite that level of not just intervention, but killing and possible, provoking some sort of conflict in the country. Because if something were to happen to President Maduro, it wouldn't be a situation in which power would just be delivered or handed over to whoever Washington decided was the right puppet to put in there. That would actually be impossible. There would have to be a scenario of mass killing, because now there are people all around the country who are trained and armed as part of the Bolivarian National Militia to fight for their country in all of the towns and cities of the country, as well as the actual Bolivarian national armed forces who have been training for a very long time and carrying out exercises because of the threats that have been directed at Venezuela, primarily from the United States, but also its allies. So I think people they find that to be very shameful, and it makes them even more proud and patriotic, and they want to stand by their government. People who know me know that I've been going to Venezuela for some years, and they remember when I was there in 2018 and 2019. And that's when the unilateral coercive measures, the sanctions, which are like over 1,000 now, were taking they were really having the most effect on people's daily lives, to say the least. And that was accompanied by a huge, propaganda operation in which people were spreading absolute lies and saying, again, like fantastical things, as the claim that Venezuelans are eating zoo animals and that you can't get a hold of certain products, which you couldn't get a hold of certain products, but it was for like a limited period of time. Some things just became more scarce. You had to stand in lines for things. Things are really difficult. That's to say that I have been going back, every year, and starting in about 2020, 2021, people were asking me, what do you think about the country now, Venezuelans? Like, how do you feel now that you've been gone and you've come back? Because they know that the country is a lot safer. It's at peace. There's no riots. The opposition is no longer allowed to have these violent so-called, protests, which are really just paid protests by opposition leaders. And, the shelves are fully stocked. There is foreign investment. You can tell that there's a lot of these like new hipster, fancy, cafes, juice bars, gyms, like anything you can think of. They have imported products from Europe that we don't even get in North America. You can access certain European things or things from even Iran that would be very difficult to get in, at least in North America. A lot of specialty items. Some obviously wealthy people, which still exists in the country, live quite well. But there's normal things. People use apps to call, any kind of ride app. They probably have dating apps. Because they have apps for everything. There are stores ever since those years that I was there during the hardest time, 2018, that were already using different forms of crypto. They were accepting crypto because of the difficulties with money, which was that it wasn't worth very much and you had to pay everything with a debit card. It had to go digital. It actually made Venezuela a bit more advanced than other countries because they started looking into other forms of payment for things. Whereas countries like Venezuela are, if they were not under sanctions, they would be able to provide all sorts of services and programs and initiatives for the people. And they already do, even under sanctions. But uh, it has had a very, harsh effect on people's daily lives. Hospitals should be nicer. Different sorts of facilities, government buildings should be nicer. People should be able to afford a better life with better salaries. But that's not just Venezuela. It's the same reason the low salaries are the same reason why people from all countries of Latin America and the Caribbean migrate across the board. People have been migrating to the U.S. If you haven't heard, for many years, and from the global north, from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil. Every time I go anywhere in Latin America, people ask me, "How can I get a visa to go work where you live because I know the wages are better?" This has
Mhm.
nothing to do with socialism. This has to do with colonialism, imperialism, the exploitation, and the exploitative system that we live under capitalism. And this is just across the board. But the difference is that in a country like Venezuela, when people don't have enough money to buy the basic essentials, they have programs that are created, such as the CLAP program, where they receive boxes of food that subsidize what they have to buy in a month, that get delivered and handed out by organized communities. So there are all sorts of benefits to living in a country like Venezuela, but it would only, and I mean, Cuba, you know, even tenfold if it were not under the blockade. And so, this is part of the reason why that absolutely has to be dismantled. Such a template could never be allowed to be exported, or a model could not be replicated in any other country. If you listen to this, Nobel Peace Prize winner, the uh, opposition figure Maria Corina, she talks about how, her idea of democracy is open markets, is opening up the country. She sees these countries as closed. They're actually not closed, but that's how these people want to frame it. She believes that anyone should be able to come and just pay whatever price they want to pay for the country's resources, set up whatever sort of companies, extract whatever they want, and take that wealth to the exterior and leave, for it to not be reinvested in the country, or to provide better programs and services for the people, or reinvest in the people, actually just to plainly ransack the country. And she's practically saying that in these interviews. And the model she's talking about is pretty much exactly what's happening right now in Argentina and in Ecuador with their US puppet governments currently. And that is a model that's going to ensure that whatever number of people have had to leave the country now for economic reasons, more people will have to leave the country, because it's not strengthening or bettering any of the country in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of its, education and the different possibilities for careers for young people. It simply won't exist under the sort of model that Maria Corina would like to see. Poor people are just going to get poorer. That's actually what neoliberalism is. And that's what happens under those sorts of regimes. When you have privatizations and you have money leaving the country, you also have, it's a model that doesn't care what happens to working class regular people. So what happens is, whatever advances have come in the last years or decades, in terms of, trying to provide some level of equity or equality in a society, that gap is going to widen, and the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. That's what these people want for the country. It's not about leftists or socialists getting their feelings hurt that some right winger is coming into power. No, it actually makes life more difficult for regular people, while rich people will begin to benefit from their stake that they have in the country's resources and the companies that they'll be rolling out without any sort of regulation. And again, that doesn't benefit the nation at all. So that's the sort of model that they're going for. It's absolute devastation. And it comes with all sorts of other things: increase in crime, deteriorating conditions in prisons, political persecution against communists, uh, the rise in organized crime, and all sorts of other things. And we've seen this in these countries, particularly now in Ecuador.
Say about the Venezuelans or people in Latin America generally who ask you, like how do I emigrate to the global north because of the purchasing power? I think you're very much right that countries in the global south don't have low purchasing power because of their because of their socialist policies. Rather, I mean, purchasing power is linked to the structure of capitalism and imperialism. So how capitalism and imperialism work together keep the purchasing power of the global south low. And I think part of the anti-imperialist struggle is to actually address that and find a way out of it. But I mean, yeah, it's a very difficult situation because no matter how good the policies of an anti-imperialist global South country is, average people might grow discontent with the government because their purchasing power is low, and that impacts the things they're able to buy, especially consumer products. I mean, things such as education and healthcare, like they might have that, and that might be good for them. But then when it comes to the purchasing power of consumer products, then a lot of them grow discontent. I mean, I don't blame them because I think it requires a lot of reading and thinking about history to understand what is happening to a lot of global
But
South
just
countries,
to
and most
clarify,
people don't have.
the people who ask
Mhm.
me how they can get a visa or get a job in Canada or the US are not from Venezuela. They're from any country of Latin America, like be it Guatemala, be it Costa Rica. Like everyone's trying to squeeze into one of those spots, and so they're living under capitalism, under U.S. puppet or at least US friendly aligned governments, and they're not having the luxuries that people have in the global north. They're not benefiting from anything because it's not like they as working class or poor people are able to exploit the labor of the neighboring country or anything like that. They're still unable to buy the latest technology or hop on their browser and purchase an airline ticket. So there's really no, I mean, if someone wanted those sorts of benefits, more purchasing power or whatever it is, they're not getting that from their government aligning with the United States. It absolutely has yet to be seen, if you ask me.
Yep. No, that's very true. And I mean, that's the other thing, exactly, because my broader point was also that it's just a general global South condition, no matter what your alliance is. If your alliance is to the neoliberal order, to capitalism, you don't necessarily become enriched because of it. Even in places like Jordan that actually have a very strong currency because their currency is linked to the British pound, they don't have purchasing power. And Jordan, I mean, it's very US friendly. So you're very much right about that. But then when it comes to the industries, I mean, you mentioned the apps that people, also the indigenous apps that people use for different things. So they've developed app technology. But when it comes to the import substitute industrialization, so producing things themselves, have the Venezuelans succeeded in having a national production industry?
Yeah, they've succeeded in little time. They would say, President Maduro would say, in record time. That was part of the problem. And when the sanctions were first issued by Obama, it took some time for them to really take the full effect, but it did become very difficult for the country to import some types of foods and some basic products, such as cleaning products, hygiene products, makeup, other sorts of uh, women's products. And so these things became very much specialty things that you would have to have dollars or euros to be able to get your hands on. And President Maduro ordered basically the ministries to begin farming across the country to at least ensure a certain supply of food. Only certain countries felt confident in continuing to supply as normal Venezuela for those specific staple food products. But Venezuela had to just essentially restructure their entire economy on their own to be able to provide those things for their people because they knew that the sanctions could potentially get worse. There's no way to circumvent them but uh, to respond head on by producing those things themselves. And so now when you go to some of these grocery stores or pharmacies and you buy things like toothpaste, like shampoo, like liquid soaps, laundry detergent soaps, antibacterial soap, it's all made in Venezuela now. And it's gotten to be better quality because when it was missing from shelves, sometimes they would put some out that were kind of like the worst kinds of knockoff versions of whatever, dial hand soap or whatever you would be used to. And now the products are really improving. And you would, even though now all the other products are back on shelves, you might opt for the Venezuelan one anyways because it's just a better product if it's like shampoo or conditioner or whatever it is. So that was a huge feat, and they considered themselves now to be food sovereign. And according to the United Nations, they have conquered hunger. They're not on the hunger map, and they have all sorts of other accomplishments in little time, and it's not reported in the mainstream news. People are still or like these sort of right wing online accounts and things continue to talk about things being very difficult the way they were now 7 years ago. But things have really improved, and they've really defeated that attempt to destroy the country.
That's right. And then you also talked about the opposition, the Nobel Peace Prize winner that I think surprised many of us, given that she was a pretty divisive figure. But there was another guy that I remember during the first Trump term, the entire Congress during the State of the Union address had a standing ovation for him. So there were two standing ovations I remember. One was for the assassination of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, and the second was for when Juan Guaido was being presented to the U.S. politicians, and they all stood up, Republicans and Democrats, and clapped for him. So whatever happened to him, the Juan Guaido guy?
I believe he's still living in Florida, and he likes to tweet and get his opinion out there, but nobody cares. Nobody cares if he lives or dies. This is the thing about the Venezuelan opposition is that they have a new figure or leader every 4.5 months. So, even though the Juan Guaido thing lasted quite a while, it lasted like, 2 years of the US politicians primarily, but also, a number of European politicians pretending like he was actually some sort of president or had any authority in the country. He had no authority whatsoever over any branch of government, over any ministry, over any power within the country, certainly not over the military. Um, and so it was a completely false, Narnia administration that they built only on social media. The United States government, through the State Department, essentially created all of this. It's just like a completely fabricated PR job of a government, and pretended like this guy who was at one point a member of the National Assembly of 2015 and became the leader of the National Assembly. They said that he was, next in line to be president, and they just proclaimed him president and had him swear himself in the middle of the street around his people. But it was just the biggest sham of all time. Now, the United States knows that Venezuela has such a bad name. It has become, because of years and years of propaganda, it has become really taboo. It's like a bad word. Venezuela has been canceled. That's what this member of the National Assembly was saying this weekend in Santa Marta. He was like, we're a country that's been canceled. We've been blackmailed. And because of that, the United States believes, and Marco Rubio believes, that you can just say anything you want, such as calling the leaders of the Bolivarian Revolution currently, which is the government officials, and the leader of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, calling them drug dealers, calling them narcos. They believe that you can just say any of that stuff and it will stick. But it's actually not sticking. It's obvious that people in the US don't believe it this time around, and around Latin America as well. Like I said, it's been taboo for a really long time to talk positively about Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution. It's been very difficult to get sound bites out of politicians, to be able to interview a lot of people about it. People were afraid with aligning themselves with a socialist government. And now people are speaking out pretty loudly in defense of Venezuela, saying this is completely unjust. These are extrajudicial killings that are taking place at sea. These are people with unknown identities. There's no due process. They're not being tried. No journalist or government in the Caribbean or Latin America is being provided with any information about who these individuals are on these boats, what their crime is, what they're linked to, or anything like that. They're just killing people in the sea. It's really it's just unbelievable that this is able to happen with no response. I mean, I was on a boat in the Caribbean yesterday in Santa Marta, a city from which a boat set out and from which some fishermen were killed on September 14th.
Yeah.
And it was a Colombian boat. That could be anyone, whether they were in international waters or whether they were in Colombian waters. We don't even know because that information is not really being provided to us. So it's the same sort of situation as when those hundreds of men were sent to the Secot in El Salvador, and Marco Rubio just came out and said that they were members of Tren de Aragua when they weren't. Most of
Yeah.
them, if they had ever had trouble with the law, were either arrested or whatever it is, charged with something that any US citizen has been or could have been charged with. In the US, until recently, everywhere in the country, it was illegal to possess marijuana. And just who knows how many millions of people have encountered problems with the law or have had to go to jail or prison for possessing small amounts of marijuana. I mean, this is a country that criminalizes its own citizens all the time and locks them up because it has the greatest prison population of anywhere in the world. That's just what they do. And so, we don't know if these people who were sent to the concentration camp in El Salvador, whether they were caught speeding on a highway or had unpaid parking tickets, but they're being called criminals and they're being called narcos, and they're it's absurd. Everyone knows they're not. And so the good news is that people in the United States, people in Venezuela, people in a lot of Latin America are no longer falling for this. And certainly people in the Caribbean have been extremely outspoken, saying that this puts our daily lives in danger. We don't want a military buildup in our country. We don't want our country to be used as a military base for a foreign government. And we don't want aggression between countries that takes place or is launched from our soil. So people are rejecting that, and so the U.S. will have to try some other psyops or whatever it is, but it's not worked.
That's right. And yeah, I mean the whole the killing, the extrajudicial killings are just outrageous. And I mean, I think you're right that people aren't falling for it as much, but still, I feel like it should really get more coverage and more outrage. But also, I mean, we talked about the Venezuelan sovereignty and their attempt to be self-sufficient, even though it's a difficult path. And that's in part in response to the U.S. sanctions on them. So, can you say a little bit more on the impact of the U.S. sanctions and also the intention of why are they sanctioned in the first place?
Yeah, so by and large, what begins to happen when a country is sanctioned is that the U.S. Treasury Department, through OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, begins to name government officials and says that they are going to issue targeted sanctions against people who have either been uh, allegedly, according to the United States, corrupt, or that they have uh, done something such as, uh, they're not even using this anymore that much, but, they say that they're doing anti democratic things, they're not transparent in their elections, they're not holding fair elections, they've committed human rights abuses, that they cracked down on protesters, that they cracked down on students, that people don't have freedom of expression. In the case of, they level those sorts of accusations against high ranking military and police officials. Um, and they roll that out over time, but it actually makes it very difficult for the corresponding ministries to go out and do things like make purchases for their country if they need things like, I don't know, spare parts for their oil industries, for their refineries, for their basic infrastructure. Like a lot of things that they would want to be able to purchase internationally becomes more difficult because not only do the sellers not want to sell them, but the shipping companies and the ships themselves don't want to have anything to do with the country because they're afraid that the sanctioned individuals who are officials of that government or any entities of that country, if they participate in any sort of transaction with them, that they too will be subject to secondary sanctions.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
it affects when you have this level of blanket and constantly increasing sanctions, it affects absolutely everything, like the ability to import medicine, life saving medications, and it affects treatments that are carried out in hospitals or clinics. It really has a profound effect on the lives of elderly and chronically ill people. And then there are issues with nutrition, malnutrition, and you know, people begin to their diets change, and as we've seen in the case of Gaza, but in other places as well. It becomes very difficult for people to maintain the standard of living that they had previously. So,
Mhm.
sanctions um, is a part of it, but it's also, the psychological uh, impact of the news, of the demonization, and it's also it harms the ability of this country to form strategic alliances and have good cooperation with other countries because other countries are afraid to participate in those sorts of exchanges and trade with these countries. This is a US imperialist war against Venezuela. And of course, Europe and the European governments are a part of that. But Europe was really bullied and forced to go along with this. Canada was forced to host and formulate the Lima Group. That was essentially just a group of countries allied with the United States, which sought to overthrow the Venezuelan government. The US gives these countries no option but to comply, and they bully them into doing their deeds. But Venezuela has also been demonized in every scenario and instance possible, like at the United Nations and the UN Human Rights Council, through the so-called human rights industry, in which you have not only journalists and media writing all these negative things about the country, but you have so-called human rights activists that are literally getting paid to smear an entire country and people. You can say absolutely anything about Venezuela, and almost nobody comes to Venezuela's defense. They slander a country of 30 million people without an ounce of remorse. If I went on television, let's say I had a big platform, or I went on my own social media platform, and I went to someone like Meghan McCain and called her a fat cow whore, people would say that's fat phobic, that's anti woman. How are you, a woman, saying that to another woman? They would
Mhm.
say, what a disgusting thing to say. Why would you stoop to such a level? But someone like Meghan McCain can go on her social media with a massive following and the large platform she has as a media personality and say that people in Venezuela began eating zoo animals because of socialism. That is
Mhm.
not a claim against socialism, by the way. It's not simply a claim against the government of President Nicolas Maduro, whether she agrees with his policies or the model that's being implemented in Venezuela, that's actually against the people of Venezuela. That is slander that they carry with them everywhere they go. When they go to Spain, when they migrate to Canada, when they migrate to Chile and Peru, they're facing xenophobia and racism and discrimination and bigotry of all kinds because of the things people see in the media about them. That is, it's something that is an attack on them as a society, and it sticks in people's minds. And you have people making all sorts of claims like that, and nobody really goes and says that's not an acceptable thing to say. And so, what is going on right now with being, the United States saying that Venezuela's government and people in Venezuela are, criminal cartel members, that Venezuelans living in the United States who are migrants are members of cartels, and all these things, is like they're trying to paint a picture, that's um, based on this belief that an entire country of people, or people who look a certain way, are all criminal, that they're all a bunch of delinquents. They have even said that, that President Nicolas Maduro sent people from mental institutions to the United States that are trying to kill US citizens, with fentanyl and everything else. They said they're sending their worst, all sorts of things, and that's just categorically false.
And my last question is, so I mean, I think it's a good follow up because you're talking about how what is common between a lot of global South countries is that they're demonized. I mean, they might be demonized or represented negatively in different ways, but they're all still demonized. And also, as we talked about, they have low purchasing power. There are some of them are under U.S. hybrid board, U.S. sanctions. So they have a lot of commonality in that sense politically. So can you, for your last response, can you tell us what is Venezuela's relationship with other anti-imperialist countries?
Yeah. Well, Venezuela tries to foster good relations with all countries, not just anti imperialist countries. This is part of why I said Venezuela is very open, not closed, like Maria Corina says. Of course, she means that it's not open because they're not just giving away oil and other natural resources. But they, under the umbrella of the Bolivarian Alliance, ALBA, they have brought together these 10 or so countries. And Venezuela helps by, providing, whenever it can, donations, aid, using its national air carrier, Conviasa, to fly things to the different islands of the Caribbean. They cooperate with Cuba, which has provided, these medical brigades to different countries of Latin America, but also the world. And Venezuela has tried to really strengthen relations with the rest of the global South. They closed their embassy and their diplomatic offices in Norway. And I can't remember if it was New Zealand or what other country it was. And then they're strengthening their diplomatic presence in Africa because that's where things are headed, according to the government. They want to ensure that they have, stronger relations and the ability to cooperate with those countries. Uh, but I think it's, like online and just to people like making these comments, even in Latin America all the time, about how, we don't have a Fidel, like, oh, we don't have like our Hugo Chavez, like how much we miss him. Everything would be like so great. And it's like this romanticizing of years past. That doesn't fit in with like 2025. Like all of the conditions are different. The reality is very different. Things are very challenging. And I come from a family of, communist guerrillas who were armed in a conflict. And, I know a lot of these people who have participated in these revolutionary uprisings in Latin America. And I think they would say, and they have said, things are very difficult now, today. The fight that we're fighting now is extraordinarily difficult because we're fighting so much of the psychological warfare. Now there's AI. Now, like, you have young people that are just absolutely obsessed with their phones and social media and TikTok. You can't get people to remember things for longer than 2 hours. So in that case, there's no like historical memory of all the different struggles of our peoples and the different uprisings and the different waves of repression and everything that we should be taking lessons from historically, but we're not. So things are really difficult, and really the leader in all of this is by and large President Maduro. And I know, like,
Mm.
not everybody thinks he's, exactly the right person to follow Chavez, but I don't know. I mean, they need to just, I don't know what they're asking for or what they're looking for. It's Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution that is bringing together communities of indigenous people, organizations, workers, all sorts of people from different countries to Venezuela to witness their model, witness their radical participatory democracy, their different projects that's happening within the communes, um, all the different things that they're working towards, and also saying, let's fight fascism together, let's learn from each other. They bring together academics from all around the world, they bring together lawyers. Right now, today, I just saw uh, one of my friends jump on a plane from Panama to go participate in like a conference of lawyers in Venezuela. And so I think that exchange is really necessary in an era in which everyone's online and everything is on Zoom. And, there's organizing has just become Zoom. Everyone is just learning things on webinars, I guess, if you even watch webinars. Or even people are, doing study groups where they read theory. In the United States, that happens a lot. There's lots of study groups. It's really great that people
Mm.
can share and learn from one another. But Venezuela is actually bringing people together and saying we need to familiarize ourselves with one another to be able to work together. Because gone are the days of, at least right now, currently, of internationalist brigades in which we're going and training somewhere from our country
Mm.
and going and fighting for the liberation of peoples in another nation, which is something we could be doing, maybe should be doing. Maybe people want to do that right now, but that's not what is happening. We need to at least be on the same page in terms of some very fundamental principles. Because Venezuela, again, is not one to impose on other countries. They allow you to do whatever you want in every other country so long as you respect their sovereignty and their model and their right to independence and their own path. So, but there are some principles that everybody should be on the same page about. And so, yeah, the country has been an absolute leader in that, and they really value, uh, the sort of anti-imperialist spirit of the peoples in Africa and Asia, and West Asia as well, and um, have really uh, strengthened those relations, particularly with countries like Iran, that was so instrumental in helping the country bounce back, Venezuela bounce back from the difficulties that they encountered in those years of the really harsh sanctions that really depleted the oil sector. So, there's just a long list of reasons why the
Mm.
Chavistas have to be absolutely exterminated as far as the US is concerned. And it's not just their resources, it's the It's the possibility that this, what Venezuela has going on could spread, and that it could inspire other countries. That's one thing that has to be stopped, and that's precisely why the extermination campaigns against communists were carried out in Latin America, and the sort of ways that it was framed. It was always framed as, this communist ideology is so dangerous to, the US's existence for its sphere of domination or influence in Latin America. We don't want, these ideas being circulated, because uh, they threaten capitalism, and they threaten the sort of models that we're trying to roll out in these countries. And so
Mhm.
Venezuela is what is standing up to that right now.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, I think the alliances with the other anti-imperialist countries is, I mean, is very important, and it's something that could ward off the pressure from the U.S., including the U.S. sanctions. So thanks very much for enlightening us and taking the time to join us. I know you've been very busy covering Latin America and had a full packed schedule. So thanks very much for joining us, and hope to have you back on the program soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to speak to someone on the other side of the world. And yeah, very interesting that you're in Pakistan now. Would love to hear
Thank
more
you.
about that.